Welcome to Performance Talk with your host, Yul Gordon and Chris Costa, where professionals discuss the latest news and developments in the profession and all areas that affect sports performance, strength and conditioning, nutrition, recovery, performance, and much more. Listen now to your host and this week's guest, next on Performance Talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Performance Talk. My name is Yul Gordon. I am here with Dan Pope. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me. Beautiful Maynard, Massachusetts. Actually pretty sunny right now, but very windy. So spring so far has been decent. So keep my fingers crossed.
You guys got kicked around a little bit for the winter, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a tougher one, I'd say. I don't know. I'd never get my hopes up that it's going to be spring soon. You know what I mean? Just like used to it kind of being bad for a while. So I try to embrace it. It's all right.
I've spent some time in the Northeast, and that's not a good habit to set to start guessing the weather.
If you never leave, you never know it's better anywhere else. So
that's right. There you go. Hey, listen, tell our audience a little bit about yourself, Dan. Let's start there, and then what you do.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a physical therapist and a strength coach. I always say I'm a self-proclaimed meathead. I always grew up loving exercise, fitness, strength training, diet, all of that good stuff. I was a guy that was kind of getting all of my friends in high school over to my parents' farm and working out together and just doing all sorts of cool stuff that I was reading about. So we would gather chains from the farm, rusty ones that have been sitting in the dirt for years. One was 20 pounds, one was 40 pounds, put on the side of a barbell that was sitting on the inside of a greenhouse because that's the only place we had to put a squat rack. And we'd be doing bench press, West Side principles, right? So I love that stuff and naturally led me to a career in personal training. I went to Rutgers University and studied exercise science. And when I finished up, that next natural step was personal training. And essentially what I was finding is that I was working with a lot of folks that just had pain, right? And what would typically happen, I'd be doing my due diligence. Okay, I have low back pain. Let's send it to the doctor. Let's send it to a physical therapist. And the patient would go see the physical therapist and come back to me. And they'd say, oh, we figured out why my back hurts. I shouldn't have been doing deadlifts or I shouldn't have been doing kettlebell swings. And, I'd scratch my head a little bit like, deadlifts are probably good. Like it's not that dangerous. And then I'd, send more patients with other pain problems like shoulder pain or something like that back to the physical therapist. Physical therapist sends them back to me. Like, oh, we got to stop doing overhead press. We have to stop bench pressing. And I just knew in my heart of hearts, like, this doesn't make any sense. There's so much positive benefit to strength training. And physical therapists are all telling me that it's bad. Doctors are all saying it's bad. It just didn't make any sense. So it just kind of led me on a journey of how to figure out how to strength train more safely, but also how to incorporate strength training as part of rehab because it makes so much sense. The strength training is something that actually makes you stronger, more robust, right? And I think nowadays this is common sense. People kind of know this. And I think physical therapists are more on board with this, but that wasn't the case back in the day. Yeah, so I essentially went to physical therapy school with that goal is how do I work with my clients in a way that's safer and be able to utilize strength training as a positive and not a negative. And I've made my entire career around that. So that's where we're at today.
Well, I'll tell you with the back in the day, I'm sure that your back in the day is a lot more modern than my back in the day. Because my back in the day goes underneath the 2000s. So those 3 zeros, go past that.
Yeah.
But with all respect to physical therapists, they weren't being taught anything about strength training. It was all function. Bring them back to function, and if it was maybe a little uncomfortable or maybe something you had to work through, their mandate wasn't there. And a lot of times what happened is you'd have athletes specifically that would take 2 or 3, maybe a month off from the weight room, and it wasn't helping them in performance. So then we had other issues, and then when they started to come back, into the weight room, they were getting those soreness, the standard stuff, soreness, tightness, and those kind of things that didn't feel like, you know, delayed onset soreness. It felt like their injury was still there. Well, there's all kind of things, as you well know now, there's all kind of things um, that you can do around the injury that can help recover from the injury. So I know your pain in that arena. I went from, you know, I was raised in small town Missouri, so there were many summers that my weight training started off with a hay bale. And you're just walking around and you're slinging hay bales up on the wagon because one, that was either for me, that was a way to make a little change in the summertime. But for other guys that were raised on the farm, that was a daily thing. So, how you got into it, while, unique to your situation, definitely not unique all the way around for some of us who grew up in rural America or outside of the standard, shiny weight room or, those kind of things. So you got into physical therapy. Let's back up a little bit before that and talk about your education. That if I'm guessing, I hate to tell my age here, but if I'm guessing, you're probably closer to the age of my daughter than you know folks I grew up with.
I'm 39, if that helps.
Yeah, she's 2 years behind you.
All right, there we go.
So so when you started coming through and you're reading the stuff in the books and the magazines, were they consistent with? And I'm asking so our audience kind of knows. Um, were they consistent with what you were trying to do in education?
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at here. But generally, physical therapy school, and I really like physical therapy school. And what I will say is that most of the professors I speak with, they're really trying to improve. They just have some barriers that are in the way.
Yeah.
And what I will start with is that for physical therapy school, it's a 3-year program. They have to cover an incredible amount of detail of a variety of different subjects like neuro rehab, cardio pulm, stuff that's not really relevant to strength training whatsoever. And they're basically trying to get you to pass this test and get you ready so you can start. We always say, so you don't kill anybody, right? So since you come out, don't kill people, can do the basics. Exactly. And, when I started PT school, I was already deeply entrenched in strength conditioning. Loved it, right? Was trying to consume everything that I can get my hands on. So at the time, people were starting to write more online. Blogs were big. tnation.com was very big. I was buying, DVDs. I had some cassette tapes, VHS, whatever, from way back in the day, and just consuming as much information as I could. And then when I got to PT school, I would say initially I was a bit sad, right? Because a lot of my professors didn't know about the folks that I thought were big names in strength conditioning. And what I will say is that, that kind of stunk. And it does reflect that schools are probably not teaching strength conditioning principles, although you can make an argument that they shouldn't be. It's not part of what the curriculum or what we're kind of taught. But they didn't know these folks. And that was sad to me. And I had a big ego at the time. And I was like, oh man, these guys don't even know X, Y, and Z, strength conditioning professional. Like, this is bad. I kind of felt initially that I had like a poor education. But I also think, looking back on it, my professors were very nuanced and they gave me a lot of really good information and advice that at the time I was a little bit skeptical of and had kind of a big ego, which wasn't great. They kind of told me, hey, be careful of these gurus, be careful of these people out there that are kind of preaching one thing and another. And now that's very, very true. And what I'll also say is that a lot of strength conditioning folks have information that is sometimes not relevant at all in the physical therapy world. And sometimes it's very, very relevant, but oftentimes it never makes it into the physical therapy world. I think, yeah, there's a really good example would be Lee Taft. Have you heard of that gentleman before? So Lee's phenomenal. And what's funny is that whenever I took any of his courses or went to a seminar, I would always tell him, I was like, Lee, your stuff is going to be amazing for physical therapists to try to progress people back to, sport and activity after a major injury like ACL reconstruction. And every time I said that, he's like, cool, that's great. Give me a thumbs up. Obviously, he's a very nice guy. But my thought was like, man, you got to start spreading this information more to physical therapists. But that's one example where I think that the strength and conditioning world hasn't made its way over to the physical therapy world as much as possible. You kind of made the statement earlier, which I definitely agree with, is that we weren't really taught a lot of the basics of strength and conditioning. But the second part is that I think physical therapy education has kind of come and gone in phases. So before I was around was kind of the modality era. And I think so physical therapy kind of get a bad name for that. So essentially you come in, maybe you get like a little massage, then you get some ultrasound, stim, you get these modalities, and then you're sent on your way. And then we kind of had this movement towards manual therapy being very, very important. Guys like Mike Boyle would say like, hey, if your physical therapist is not doing manual therapy, like, what are you getting, right? I mean, ART was huge at the time. Instrument assisted got big. Then eventually things like dry needling. And then we got into this era of pain science education, and there's a lot of shaming on manual therapy, being poor. We're starting to move away from some of that era, more into strength conditioning and more evidence-based care, and a lot of skepticism right now in the physical therapy space. But I think now strength conditioning is kind of getting more of a home, right? And I think that it really depends on the clientele that you work with, right? So if you're a physical therapist that works in a standard outpatient setting, and most Americans are sedentary individuals, they don't do anything that's active really, you probably don't need strength and conditioning principles. They're not that important. But if you're working with athletes or folks that like to train a little hard in the gym, then all of a sudden these strength and conditioning principles become tremendously important, right? So what's least nice now is I think that physical therapists are becoming aware of that. Programs and universities are becoming aware of that. They're connecting students who want to learn more about this to facilities like where I work at Champion PT and Performance so that they can kind of gain these skills. I think the information is becoming more widely available, even too much so sometimes, right? You go on YouTube, you can actually get a lot of really good strength and conditioning information. I'm obviously on YouTube a bunch, so I'm biased towards that. But there's obviously a lot of garbage out there too. But I think there's a lot of great information as well. So if you want to kind of self-learn, there's obviously great free content, and there's a lot of like really good paid content in the form of online courses. You can learn more to kind of level up, I'd say.
The important thing I hear in your statement there is perspective. And if you're working or your primary clientele are general population with the generally sedentary daily routine, then yeah, okay, let's not come in here and do strength stuff because it's not going to be relevant. What we need is a perspective that there are multiple ways to do things based on multiple criteria, and that this is very broad and very basic, but it becomes important as a professional to be able to say, okay, I got a young man in here, just started college, and he's got let's say a Achilles tendon issue. What do we need to do? Well, obviously he wants to get back on the court, field, ice, whatever it is. How do we get him back there? Well, just sitting him in the PT room for a half an hour, doing, STEM or whatever we choose as a modality, doing that may not help him from a physical spot, and definitely doesn't help him from a psychological spot if you send him back out the door and we've done, no additional movement training. We've not helped him. PT is usually good about helping folks manage pain, but what should you feel? What should it be? And then what should your reaction be? Those kind of things. So I talked a lot about with my athletes who come in injured about expectation. If you have I recently had a young man with a um, meniscus tear. I said, look, we can train around this, and I'd already talked to his doc and his PT. I said, we can train around this, but you're gonna have to expect some pain until the doc can get you scheduled and get you in there and clean that up. Well, it doesn't feel like the other knee, and blah, blah, blah. Well, of course it doesn't. You have an injury. And sometimes you just got to tell those guys that just because we're training around it doesn't mean it's not going to be uncomfortable. And in the physical therapy realm where it's just, no athletes in this general population, here's, you know this better than I do. What you get is sometimes, not everyone, and it's better now than it was back in the day. Well, you feeling pain? Yeah, I'm feeling pain. Well, okay. There's going to be some of that. Are we doing damage? Are we doing further damage? Okay. So we go from a full deep squat on the back to a quarter front squat. You know what I mean? And hey, look, when I go down this far, it hurts. Don't go down that far. Some of it is just, we're
Common
trying.
sense.
Yeah, so we're trying to get you. We're trying to build up that resilience around the injury, so that we don't, when we come back, we don't progress you too fast, and you're still getting the same pain and possibly re-injury if we still got you doing what I call a cellar squat. You're dropping in, boom, and you're way down at the bottom, and you're trying to drive it back up. Well, that's probably not going to feel real good on a torn meniscus.
Yeah.
So that is everything you're saying there is right on point, and I know our audience will appreciate getting the perspective that you have, strength coach to PT, but based in that, as you said in your introduction, based in that meathead philosophy.
Yeah. I would say that you're entirely accurate. One of my biggest goals, and it's one of the things I really try to push other physical therapists to adopt the philosophy, is that we want people who have an injury to do as much as they possibly can that's as similar as what they're supposed to be doing. So if you're like an in-season basketball athlete, ideally we'd like to stop nothing, keep everything exactly the same, but we still need to protect the healing injury. And I think a lot of it depends on what it is. So if you have, call it a red flag. So essentially, if you have something that we can't play on, like a stress fracture, we probably have to pull you out completely, right? And that's unfortunate, but that's kind of the name of the game. Otherwise, you risk something more serious happening. But if it is like an Achilles tendinopathy, let's say, which is pretty common, we have good research to show that you can continue with your sporting activities as long as your pain is below, say, about a 5 out of 10 or so, as long as the next day you're kind of back to your baseline. And essentially, whenever I have an athlete that comes in, we got to figure out where they're at. How irritable is that tendon? What can we handle? Can we jump? Can we run? Can we strength train? What are things that the tendon handles? What are things that the tendon is not handling or is not tolerating well? And essentially, we give them as much as they can possibly handle without overdoing it from a pain perspective, right? And the other one is compensation, because if you can basically hobble through a game, right, and play with less pain, but you're compensating like crazy, that's also bad, right? But I think that's really nice because you really don't want to lose any progress. So if we're trying to continually get better, right, keep training, keep making progress, if we tell you, hey, you need to stop, you're going to decondition. And that's a problem because that's moving us away from our goals. And the other piece, and I think you had Tim Gabbin on the podcast at one point,
Yeah.
but like their chronic workload is going down, down, down. And now we have a higher mountain to climb and a more dangerous mountain to climb when we return them.
Yeah, on the way back. Yep.
You got it. So I think a lot of it is communicating with the coaches, figuring out what's appropriate, experimenting a little bit. Like, hey, I think these drills are going to be fine in practice, but let's stay away from these drills. Let's make sure that when we play, we're only doing it for this period of time, right? And then we just tinker from there. and then we apply exercise, and we try to continue strength training as much as the athlete is normally supposed to. If this is an off-season athlete, chances are they're going to be able to do the large majority of their training. If it's a lot of strength conditioning stuff and it's not as much conditioning and actual, sport-specific activity, then maybe they don't notice their Achilles very much. We just give them a few extra rehab exercise on top of what they're already doing. In season, it might be something different. I'm going to have to pull back a little bit more so, just because the sport-specific stuff might be more painful. So you treat each individual as an individual, figuring out where they're at, and then trying your best not to pull back too far, because that creates problems in itself. And like you said, it's not just physical, it's psychological as well. Athletes hate it when they got to pull back.
Oh yeah. And sometimes you'll get more buck and kick from that than you do from the physical part.
Mm-hmm.
And coach, it feels fine. Just let me do X. Well, every time we've tried X, we've come away the next day having to sit out the whole day because we're irritated.
Yeah.
So let's not do that.
Yeah.
Let's do Y, where you get 80% of X, but then do some therapeutic stuff or some different stuff that helps us out. Let's so we've talked about bringing how we manage that piece with the injury. Say we have now we have an athlete with he or she are coming back from the surgery piece, and they get that surgery, and let's stick with the meniscus because it's just most recent in my brain here.
Mm-hmm.
But now he's after surgery, and you're having to hold him back. Well, but it feels good. Well, I'm sure it feels good, better than it has in 6 months, since we brought this thing up. But let's go through the steps and let's go through the process. How do you manage that from a physical side, but two, an expectation side from both the athlete and the coach?
Yeah, for sure. And I think operative, so having a surgery versus non-op, is very, very different. So the first model is essentially figuring out where the athlete is. First, no red flags, right? No red flags. Go ahead, figure out where they're at in terms of tolerance. And there's going to be a little variance based on type of injury. Like a joint injury is probably going to be a little different than like a tendon injury. But you got to figure out where that person is. And then you basically prescribe exercise and training to fit them, suit them. Surgery is a little different. Surgery is almost like a reset button, right? Because you're starting at the very bottom. And a lot of it depends on the type of surgery. So it's always very important that the physical therapist knows what's going on. And then you also have solid communication with the coaches, strength staff, so on and so forth. But let's say you have, it's called a meniscectomy, where they trim out a small portion of the meniscus. From there, you still have to respect that joint, and we have to have a slow progression, but we can be a whole lot more cavalier, right? We can do a lot more early on. It's really based on the athlete's tolerance, right? Let's say you have a meniscus repair, and let's say we throw a wrench in there and say they have an ACL reconstruction with it. So you have a pretty beefy procedure that really needs to be respected. And oftentimes you're set back big time. You're going back to zero for the most part. So if it's a meniscus repair, depends on the type of repair. Depends how big the tear is. Depends a little bit on the individual, but oftentimes these are non-weight bearing for a period of time. So let's say somewhere between 2 and 6 weeks, you're not putting weight on this. 6 would be very, very conservative, but let's just say that during those 6 weeks, you're getting weaker, you're getting more atrophy, right? From the acute to chronic workload ratio perspective, your chronic workload is tanking, right? And you kind of have to have some of that happen just because we need to protect the meniscus. So if you start with too much too soon, you can create a re-tear, right? And there's a lot of evidence to show that does happen, particularly in the rotator cuff. The meniscus, not quite as much. We can generally push the envelope a little bit more with those. But you're starting from zero. So it's really tough for your athletes. So the first, let's say 4 to 6 weeks, if they are non-weight bearing, doing all their exercise on a table. Their knee hurts a ton, right? Swollen. They can't do anything that they like to do. So they're kind of set in this psychological tailspin. Their identity is like really taking a major hit right now because identify as athletes, and all of a sudden they're not athletes and they feel like they have no sense of self-worth. So that's very hard. But I still have the same mentality. So essentially for my athletes, I want them to do as much as they possibly can do while still protecting the healing surgical site, right? So what does that mean? We can still develop some sport qualities. We can still maintain some fitness in the upper body. So we can do things like cycle ergometer. It's boring, but at least you're doing some sort of cardio. You can strength train your upper body. Generally, I'm having these folks doing, let's say, barbell work or machine work because they don't have to move dumbbells around a lot. They can just move a pin, right? They're still working the upper body quite a bit. Once we're able to do some lower body cycling, we get them cycling more and more. And then we just hammer the rehab as much as they can. So a lot of that is basic table exercises at first, just because we can't weight bear, right?
Right.
But as soon as they're allowed to, again, we're still being smart. We want to push them as much as we can within reason. And for athletes in particular, there are a few tricks you can use to make them feel like they're actually training a little bit harder. So one of which is blood flow restriction training. So do you think your audience knows what blood flow restriction training is?
Most of them will.
Most of them know? Okay, great. So with BFR, obviously, you can do some pretty hard work with minimal loads and get a very similar effect from a strength and hypertrophy perspective really early on after surgery. So let's say you're non-weight bearing for 4 weeks. We start to do some squats, maybe some hidden stuff at week 4 to 6. Once we start some tolerance with that, we throw some BFR straps on there. You get your athletes sweating. You get your athletes sore in their muscles. You have them start feeling like an athlete again as soon as we possibly can, right? And then as we're starting to tolerate more conditioning, let's say you've been doing 4 to 6 weeks worth of bike, maybe we can start putting in some higher intensity stuff, some sprint stuff work in there, right? So you're getting to the point where we're starting to build that conditioning back up again. Have some good research, particularly in soccer players, that VO2 max predicts your risk of injury. So if you have a poorly conditioned athlete returning back to a sport, more likely to get hurt. How do we start filling that bucket up as fast as we can early on? We could probably start doing it with a bike before we can start doing the running. And then also to scratch that psychological itch of, man, I wish I could just exercise and feel like an athlete again, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that we do at Champion, which is where I do physical therapy at, and I feel like we do a pretty decent job of this, is that we are a strength conditioning facility. So we get folks in the gym as fast as it is safe. So let's say I have meniscus repair, it's 8 to 10 weeks now, we're squatting, we're deadlifting, right? It may not look like the typical strength conditioning program, but we're lunging, we're doing step-ups, we're doing all the stuff that you would see in a typical strength and conditioning program. Are we still isolating the knee? Are we still doing range of motion stuff? We still like hitting some modalities and that typical physical therapy that you see? Of course, but we want folks to be athletes. And they're also out in the gym with their buddies, right? Which I think is really helpful from a psychological perspective.
That's a real, nice piece, as far as, where they're doing their work.
Big time.
I've told people a lot back in the day. I used to tell a lot because I tried to work with physical therapists and different folks, but everybody was isolated in a treatment room and all those kind of things. And I said, hey, let's these guys that are ready, guys and girls, I said, let's put them over in the corner and make this area look like the gym that they work out at school or similar to that. And I said, we can still manage all the exercise, but it's the feel.
Yeah,
And
it definitely is.
And then they look over at, the older people or the more sedentary people on the tables and they realize what they're doing is completely different.
Yeah.
So psychologically they become more engaged and not so depressed, which, everybody's, if you were an athlete and you're younger, which I'm sure you were, we've all had an injury and man, that's a, how you feel about yourself. That is a straight down the tubes kind of thing. You're like, oh, what is it is this what it's going to be the rest of my life? Blah, 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 blah. I had some pretty significant ones where, I'm sitting out a whole year and I'm like, am I
It's the
really,
worst.
is this really going to be what it's like? But, um, let's transition a little bit, not too far from that, but, we've talked a lot about PT and strength and conditioning, but working with other professionals, nutritionists, psychology folks, just, athletic trainers that come in and, they're supposed to be the bridge to several areas of this and the connective tissue from, maybe an outside facility to the back into the athlete world and all those kind of things. So let's talk about working with other professionals and how you guys manage that if you do.
Yeah, we're pretty blessed at Champion PT and Performance. So obviously, I'm a physical therapist. I do have a background as a strength coach. So I did that for a few years before I went into physical therapy school. But we work with a lot of strength coaches. And what I will say is that probably the two professionals that we communicate best with are going to be surgeons and then also strength coaches. Because essentially, when an athlete gets an injury, and this is a little bit unfortunate, not to throw surgeons under the bus, but they need a good surgeon. They need a surgeon that really understands the type of injury that the individual is dealing with. A good example is we work with a ton of baseball at Champion PT and Performance. And let's say you have a labral injury, like a slap tear. If you get a doctor who wants to tighten that thing down, which if you have an unstable shoulder, that's what you want to do, tighten it down. You might have just ended that person's career, though.
So I was going to
Because if
say
they're
for a regular person.
for a regular person, right? But for a baseball player, you need to make sure that they can get into layback, right? Be able to throw that baseball nice and fast. So you need to make sure you send to a good surgeon who understands injuries appropriately and they don't get led down the wrong pathway. So we do a lot of vetting of our surgeons and we communicate a lot with them. The ones like the best, I text them. I have some surgeon friends where they'll text me within like a minute. I'm like, are you in the operating room today? You're like, your hands are supposed to be sterile. Are you playing with your cell phone in the middle of a surgery? You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah, and that's really good. I think that's a great thing, and obviously you want to make sure that they're smart, right? And then the other part is that we believe pretty strongly about this is that I'm a physical therapist, right? I have a background as a strength coach, but I don't do strength conditioning every single day. I do physical therapy. Are there elements of strength conditioning? Yes, but we hire strength conditioning coaches that are amazing, and it's silly for me to think that I'm going to do a better job than a strength coach that does it all day long and is really good at it. So we have a lot of systems in place because I think we do have to be careful about sending like a post-op ACL reconstruction patient straight into the strength conditioning world without like a list of, principles and parameters to kind of go by. So we have systems at Champion where as soon as we're able to, we get them out with the strength coaches. So we're starting to work with those folks right away with some training wheels, right? Say, hey, we're not doing any jumping yet. We'll start some jumping at about month 3 to month 4. Physical therapist will run the patient through some jumping drills, make sure it's okay. But once we find that it is okay, now the strength coach is free to program these things, right? And we have kind of protocols and systems that work. So we're very closely knit with the professionals around us. I'm constantly communicating with the coaches out in the strength conditioning portion of our facility. Just make sure patients are doing well, checking in on the patients, checking in on the strength coach, how are things going? We communicate a ton. I think that is phenomenal. From a nutrition standpoint, we have a few professionals that we really like. I think where nutrition becomes really important are in patients that have REDS, relative energy deficit syndrome, or bone stress injuries. There's quite a bit of research to know nutrition is important. Yeah. I work with a lot of CrossFit athletes. I work with a lot of strength and fitness folks, so powerlifters, Olympic weightlifters. Oftentimes, these folks need really good advice, just like any other athlete. And I have a few folks I really like. So if an athlete is trying to step up their game from a performance standpoint, but also from an injury standpoint, because if you're not eating well, it's probably not going to help with your recovery. I will refer out. I have a basic understanding of nutrition. I can tell my athlete, hey, you need to eat X amount of calories, you need to make sure you're getting enough protein, and you have to hydrate well. And I can push those things. But once it gets beyond my scope, it's stupid for me to just be the nutritionist. I need to refer out again, right? Same thing goes with psychology. Like I have a basic understanding and I'm more like a hobbyist with that because I like to learn about it. It's interesting, right? But we have professionals around us that are great, right? You guys know Tony Gentilcore?
I know who he is, yes.
We're lucky too because his wife, Lisa Lewis, is local and she's a sports psychologist as well. So we try to also kind of gather good professionals. So it's, just social workers and different healthcare providers that kind of specialize in that realm. But what I will say is that the sports psychology portion is really important to understand. Sometimes the average social worker is kind of like the average physical therapist. No, not trying to knock on them, but their specialty is not athletes, right? So you just kind of need to vet those folks. And oftentimes, you find someone who's really good and you just keep using that person over and over again. So recommendation is just to find really good professionals around you and realize that you have shortcomings as a professional. And what's also really nice is if you refer to a professional who's very good, your patient's going to love you for it. They're not going to be upset that you don't know how to do, psychotherapy. That's not your job, right? Refer out and let the professionals do their work, and that's going to be ultimately best for your patient.
We have a saying in my little shop here that says, stay in your lane and refer. That doesn't mean you don't understand, the importance of nutrition or psychology. Doesn't mean any of those things that you might think are negative because you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It means you're professional enough to know where your ability and responsibility stops, and you're smart enough to vet good people that you can refer them to. That's all it really means as a professional to me. Um, folks tell me, oh, you got a doctorate in psychology, you got 2 master's degrees somewhere in sports medicine. I said, yeah, but I'm a strength guy. I'm a
Yeah.
conditioning guy. I said, I know I have these things that I tell people all the time. I bumped into a doctor because I just wanted to keep learning, and I was just enrolling this class, enrolling that one, and back and forth throughout my career, and finally I had um one of my older mentors. He said, just do the dissertation and get the doctorate. He said, you've already got enough hours. And then I had an academic tell me the same thing. So I bit the bullet a few years ago as an old man and just went and got it.
That's awesome.
But one of the things I tell people when I'm referring them out, they say, well, can't you just do the psychology part? I said, wouldn't be fair to you if I did. That's not what I do every day.
Yeah.
And I'm not a clinician. I'm on the academic and research side with my education. So for me to be over here trying to, do these things with you, one, it's not going to help you. Two, I'm way out of my lane. So the best thing I can do as a professional is refer you to somebody. I have a person I just met who's a physical therapist with a background in strength conditioning, and they work as a physical therapist, much like you do. And I referred somebody to them. I said, we had this muscle issue, tendon. I don't know if it's muscle or tendon. I said, but we're not getting it resolved, so we need some help. So I'm gonna send this young man to you. He's still relatively young, still a developing athlete, you know. So we want to nip this kind of stuff in the bud before it becomes something they just drag with them all the time. You really want to you really want to send your client to me? I said, yeah. And she said, I get so much pushback from, you know, people not wanting me to send their clients. They just want me to tell them what to do. I said, no, I don't practice physical therapy.
Yeah.
So you can tell me what to do. And when it's outside of, hey, we're not squatting today, or let's stay away from extensions and curls or something like that. When it's deeper than that, I'm out of my lane. So I need you to take them on. Okay, well, when we get them done, we'll send them right back. I said, okay. I mean, I'm not, so I think as professionals in the professional realm, we needed, I don't know if it's ego. I don't know if it's just, lack of understanding. I don't know what it is, but we can't be afraid to refer to different professions. And sometimes I've told, like I had a couple of pro athletes. I say, hey, why don't you go train with, I'll just say Bob. Why don't you go train with Bob for a couple weeks? Well, why? I said, I think we're getting a little stale. And, I think you need something different. His approach is a little different than mine. And, let's come back to the basics when we've had enough. I said, well, let's do 3 or 4 weeks with him and see what you come up with.
Yeah.
8 times out of 10, then they'll come back and they'll say, hey, look, I really liked what he was doing. Can we put that in the annual plan?
Yeah.
Can we, do that? So, well, if you want to, yeah, sure. What I tell other professionals, and sometimes a lot of those guys with opening their own shop or part of an organization. I said, hey, I'm sending this athlete to you. He's going to be here 4 weeks. I said, don't be afraid to, if you got issues to give me a holler. We're always better together than we are trying to do this thing all on our own.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the athlete or the patient is the most important piece that we work on. All those professions, all the professions that we work with, we're spokes to the hub. The hub is the athlete. So
Yeah.
if we're doing what's best for the athlete, we're not afraid to send them to Dan and say, Dan, you do some things a little different than me.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you got 2 weeks for me, or maybe 4 weeks for me with this guy, and see if we can fit him in.
Yeah. One of the running jokes at Champion, and Champion, we see a ton of like baseball, a lot of professional baseball athletes, is that I'm not the baseball guy. I could barely throw a baseball, right? So I'm like a baseball loser. So if I get a baseball athlete, and like I can obviously work with them because I'm at the facility there and I understand baseball a little bit, but played it growing up. But I will ask a lot of questions, and I'll even refer to someone else. We all have our own little niche expertise within the building. So if someone comes in, some reason I have a gymnast on my schedule, we have a world-class gymnastics physical therapist, Dave Tilley, sent him there. Rowers, Lisa Lowe, Mike Sadu is a golf guy. Like, we just have really good physical therapists for specific niches where when I get an evaluation, I'm like already thinking, we're going to send you over to someone else because I could treat you. Sure, I could treat you, but not as good as someone who sits right next to me. And that's a disservice to the person in front of me if I don't refer them, right?
Exactly. So,
Yep.
So yeah, if you hear that disturbance in the back, that's my dog. Occasionally he'll try to lose his mind, but we're gonna go ahead instead, and hopefully he'll be quiet here in a minute.
No worries. Pumped.
Yeah, yeah. So we're moving along, and we're referring athletes, and now it's time for the athlete to go back to training. Go back to sports specific training. There's always a little apprehension whether they tell you or not, but it's always there, and we recognize that not everybody deals with that as best they can. Some guys say, "Hey, I've had a couple of young ladies soccer players say, yeah, I don't think I'm ready." Is it a psychological issue or is it a physical thing?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to rule out that it's physical, and then the referral goes to the sports psych professional.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's both, right? I think that the job as a physical therapist is you do handle a little bit of the psychology of it, right? Because you're dealing with like people that are an absolute mess, right? Just had their life flipped upside down, and they're going to talk to you about it. It's kind of like as a personal trainer, like you're going to work with some patients that have pain. You can't avoid it, right? You can't just like whenever someone hurts, send them straight to physical therapist only. So you deal with some of that. One of my thoughts is that you have to show these athletes that they can return. And I think in a lot of facilities, they're just not getting that, right? Yeah. So I to kind of answer your question directly, we have criteria-based progressions for athletes, and that's also based on timelines as well. So let's say ACL reconstruction, where we kind of have the most research, kind of one of the most common injuries that take a really long time to get back. We're not really considering getting back to, let's say, any sort of running type stuff until somewhere between 3 or 4 months, probably closer to 4-month mark. We're measuring strength, right? We look at strength of the quad, strength of the hamstring. We're also looking at things like rate of force development. And we're looking for, let's say, 70, 80% symmetry before we even think about doing these things, right? And then we progress over the course of time. We have protocols to ensure that the acute to chronic workload ratio is not being disobeyed, right? So they're very slow progressions. And we get very, very specific towards the end stage of rehab. We're testing. Like, we're lucky at Champion that we have force plates too, so we can make sure that folks have good symmetry between sides. Their jumping looks good. We make sure that their quality of movement is really good. So their single-legged squats, their single-legged jumping, all that looks good. We're gaining our symmetry back, right? And at the end stage of rehab, particularly, let's say if I have a soccer athlete, what I would say is that if you have a typical soccer athlete, a general outpatient setting, they're probably not getting a solid strength conditioning program. They're probably not loading well. They're probably not doing much in terms of jumping, agility work, sprinting, all that stuff. There's no way in hell they're going to feel confident to return, right? So I think that's a big part of it. If you look at the very end stage of rehab for us, we're doing sometimes 45 minutes to an hour worth of agility drills to mimic what they have to do when they're actually playing their sport or when they're going back to practice, right? And we've essentially built them up over the course of time. And when they're getting around that 9 month mark, we're going to give them a psychological readiness questionnaire to assess how ready they feel. And you have an athlete that's already kicking butt and doing everything. Sometimes you're pulling them back
Yeah.
because they feel like they're so ready at that point, and we're still like, I don't think we've actually built you up enough. So I think the physical therapist responsibility is twofold, right? So A, you have to recognize if there really truly is a psychological issue, and you can do that through questionnaires, right? And just kind of getting a general feel for the athlete and then referring out there actually is a problem. But the second piece is that you have to prepare them. You have to show them they are ready, and you have to really build them, right? So we're trying to basically get to the point where an athlete can do their sport. So as a physical therapist, you have to do your due diligence, but you have to understand the sport, right? I mean, soccer, I think, is a good example. Most people kind of know what soccer is, but you're playing for like an hour. You might be running 5 to 8 miles during that time period. You have to know like how much sprinting you have to do, whatever drills are going to occur during. So if you're doing those drills during your rehab, then the athlete's probably going to feel pretty good when they go on the field and do the same exact thing. So I would say that that's a tall task. It's really hard for most physical therapists to do, given the state of kind of outpatient settings, insurance reimbursement, so on and so forth. There's a ton of barriers, right? So I'm not trying to just put the blame on physical therapists. Plus, most physical therapy places are not sports physical therapy places. Maybe they have the name to say sports physical therapy, but they're really not, right? So, but
And
go ahead.
unfortunately, you can kind of tell if they're sports physical therapy places by the size of the shop.
Yeah. Like you're not going to be able to run, jump, change directions inside of this place.
You got to have a little room.
Yep.
One of the things that that I was able and fortunate enough to have was that I worked with a sports medicine doc and a physical therapist that would would it was adamant for the strength and conditioning coach to be, especially with ACL injury, but for most serious injuries, strength and conditioning coach to be involved at week 12. Not to necessarily be doing anything, but that week 12 piece is when you really start getting into the meat and potatoes of bringing that athlete back. Um, so at week 12, you may not be doing anything, but you're observing what the PT's doing, so that okay, I can, I'm going to get them at maybe week 16, 18, whatever. They're going to enter back into weight room, and now I know, okay, we can do this because I've seen them do it in physical therapy, and we can progress from that spot right there, and we can do that. Or I go to the physical therapist and say, hey, you think we can do some side steps over, over a couple ladders and progress those ladders in height, so that we're not just using the tiny hurdle and doing it, stepping over 3 hurdles, but let's challenge it a little bit. Let's use the big, the medium, and the small hurdle, and change levels, change directions, change all that, do all that stuff that they're going to do on the field, whether or court or whatever, whether they realize it or not. This all transfers. You're up, you're down, you're in and you're out, you're under a hurdle, you're over a hurdle, there's a tiny obstacle, you're front, you're back. So all those things, um, that's what you're talking about week 12 to week, 18, 24, whatever it is, whatever the progression timeline is. But that's what you're watching. Then when you get the athlete back, you have a clear understanding of where they are, what they need to do, and then the PT gives you. I always like the PT to give me, okay, what's the timeline on this? When can we tell them, let's try to run a drill at full speed?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're gonna walk it. We may pick up the intensity a little bit with a little bounce in, and we may jog a couple of things. But when can we have them get in a stance or get in a sport position and explode from there?
Yeah, good stuff, man. What's funny is that right after this, I'm going to a coffee shop with one of the other employees at Champion, right? And we're actually kind of rewriting our return to run, return to agility, return to like sprinting and plyo program so they can be implemented in the strength conditioning setting, right? So we try to get people started as soon as they can. I mean, we just had a meeting last week where our Tommy John patients, right? So UCL injuries, elbow injury for throwers, we're getting in the gym right away doing blood flow restriction training for the lower body, right? Because they don't have a hamstring graft, and if they're not taking a graft from the lower extremity, we're working their lower extremity right away. And we don't feel that these athletes need to do that inside of the PT setting. They can do it right in the gym. And the strength coaches are watching it, and they know the expectations, and they know the setting, like they've done it before. So we're very confident they can do it right away. And then essentially we make these systems, like I'm about to go talk to Kevin right now, and we say like, all right, it's week 14. What is okay for these athletes to do in the gym? What agility drills are okay? All right, now we're getting, week 18. How do we advance? 20, 22. Acceleration work. What percentage? All right, now we're building up. So essentially, like at what week is it okay? So largely we want people in the gym as soon as it's safe and doing as much as they can. And it's a little tough for our strength coaches because I think it's scary, right? We're expecting them to go through a rehab protocol when there's kind of like no education out there on how to deal with folks in pain, right? But you have the best skill set to help these folks, which is funny.
Sometimes I've talked over the 2000s and the teens. I was talking about, some of these things, but people were looking at me like, it's not what I can't do that, or I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, but you're the best suited to do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what they have in front of them as athletes that they need to get to.
Yeah.
So I again think that's that piece where, one, professionals need to talk, but two, we need to understand that we all overlap, in this process. It's not just PT. It's not just strength and conditioning. It's not just nutrition. Man, if I have a kid comes in there that walks into me, or an athlete that walks into me, and they're dragging, no matter what time we set the appointment for, they're dragging in the morning, they're dragging at noon, they're dragging. What am I going to check on? Well, how are you resting at night, man? What if rest is not a problem with your energy, the only other problem it could be is nutrition. Not a whole bunch of things out there give you energy. Rest and nutrition.
Something's wrong there.
Yeah. So if you're dragging all, it doesn't matter when we, schedule the time that you drag it every session, or you're always tired, man, something's going on. And the only 100% I need in the weight room is an effort. I don't need you to be perfect at the exercise to get benefit from it. I don't need you to be, to look perfect. None of that stuff. I just need you to give me the effort. But if we don't have the energy to get the effort done, I don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
It's like a car with no gas.
Exactly.
You can mash on the gas pedal, but if the wheels don't roll and it sputters a little bit, that means we might be out of gas.
Yeah. It's good stuff. If I work, and actually I haven't worked with them for a couple of years now, but I spent a lot of time working with a company called Power Monkey Fitness, and it's a continuing education company, mostly for CrossFit coaches, but they have these kind of fitness retreats where you learn a ton, and their staff is ridiculous, meaning that like they've got subject matter experts from all different types of training. So Olympic weightlifting, also running, gymnastics. And I would say that most of these guys have either been to the Olympics or have competed at the national level, and they work pretty much full time doing this, right? So they're all extremely good at it. And they brought in a bunch of other subject matter experts for things like nutrition, stress, sleep, right? And what's always funny is that we all speak the same language, right? But for different goals. So for example, like if you're trying to chase performance, you got to sleep well, you have to eat well, you got to manage stress. If you're trying to recover from an injury, it's the same exact thing, right? Like you're not going to recover from that injury if you're not sleeping at nighttime and not fueling appropriately. And then you're also going to tank your performance. So, we're kind of speaking that same language, but for different goals, right?
And it's that understanding from the professionals that, again, the particular person that you're working with, and this is across the board, athlete or general population client, they're the hub of the wheel. It's all held together by a particular framework, which are the approaches of the people doing the work on the spokes. But that in order for that wheel to roll, you got to get that frame around it, and you got to have a hub. So you have to have we have to have the athlete or the patient, and then it's incumbent on us to talk to each other and fill up all that other stuff in between and those kind of things. So let's go to a question I always ask. What would be something that you would like to see in the profession, whether it be specifically physical therapy or in the profession as a whole of performance and those kind of things happen?
I guess I'm switching gears a little bit here. One of the things I talk about frequently is I don't think physical therapists market themselves well. So I just wrote a book, right? And it's with Dean Somerset. So he's a fitness guy. He's a personal trainer, and I'm a physical therapist. But if you look at the pain management section of Amazon, the most popular books generally aren't physical therapists. If you think about the people that are most popular from a pain perspective, guys like Knees Over Toes guy, I have nothing wrong with him. I think he has a lot of great stuff. He's not a physical therapist. And kind of like what you were saying earlier, it's like physical therapists see people in pain every day, all day. That's their job. That's what they do. They're phenomenal at it. I would like to see more physical therapists as leaders in the space of helping folks in pain, right? I think that the skill set that we have, and I also like chiropractors, right? I think they're great. I like doctors, I think they're great. I think the skill set that physical therapists have is so powerful for helping people in pain, but I think we're underutilized and we don't market ourselves well. So I do wish we did a better job from that perspective. And it's one of the things I feel strongly about that I'm trying to do as well. So
I think that piece could be echoed for strength coaches, and understanding understanding where they fit. I think is another one for strength coaches. Understand where you fit. You're not physical therapists, but you fit in there somewhere. You're not the nutritionist, but you fit in there somewhere. The worst, I hate to say it like this, but no, I'll just say it. The worst strength coaches I've seen have also fashioned themselves as nutritionists, but they're not talking nutrition, they're talking supplementation, which is two different things. Supplements is something completely different. And I always tell my athletes, look, supplement means to enhance, replace for whatever reason or whatever. I said, if your nutrition's bad, what are you supplementing? You can add a protein shake to a diet of, pizza pies and, chocolate cake. What are you supplementing with the protein shake? Well, I'm getting the protein that those things don't have. But are you still getting enough protein or the required amount of protein or whatever the case may be? So for me, it's a matter of not only just staying in your lane, understanding that, you probably ought to leave some things like we talked about earlier, to folks that do it. Nutritionists and dietitians are very well versed in supplementation, but they also know the difference between nutrition and supplementation. But you can click on anything on the internet, and you can sports nutrition or nutrition, and then here comes this supplement brand up, and they have protein powders and all these things, and I'm like, okay, it's a good sales pitch, but it's not necessarily on the right road.
Yeah.
It's supplementation. So, well, you know what we mean now, because the way you're approaching it is with a mindset of nutrition. And most of the time, these under 20s or 23s and under that you're talking to, they're getting the wrong impression. So you might mean well, but meaning well doesn't mean you're right. So, all right, let's talk about the latest book and where we can get it, man.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So I grab it. So as I mentioned, I wrote a book, Human Kinetics, with Dean Somerset, who's a personal trainer up in Canada. And essentially, I think there's a lot of misinformation out there when it comes to trying to prevent injury and rehab. And I think a lot of folks just kind of will say the reason why they got hurt is based on one thing. Oh, my technique was off. I can't tell you how many people said, like, I hurt my back deadlifting, but I thought my technique was good, essentially meaning that they think technique is the only reason why they get hurt, right? So we wanted to try to create a strength training book on longevity, and we want to try to provide good information for the average lifter to know how to train properly, but also all the factors that lend to an injury and what to do when an injury pops up, when there's pain, right? Do I need to see the doctor? Can I train through this? What's appropriate? How do I change my training? So if I have back pain when I squat, how do I modify that squat so I can keep working towards my training goals and rehab at the same time, right? So we created that book. It's Rock Solid Resilience. It's out right now. It's been out for about a week and a day right now. You can find it anywhere they sell books online, Amazon.com, all that good stuff. So, yeah.
So man, how does your boy get a book sent to him?
I got to send you a copy, I guess. Yeah.
I whether you send it to me or not, I was gonna get it.
Oh, thank you. I
But
appreciate that.
but I'm kind of cheap. So
I'm cheap too. Don't worry about it. I'm very cheap.
So if you wouldn't mind sending me one, I'll show accept it with grace and humility.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Send me your email after this.
I'll do
Yep.
that. Hey, listen, man, it's been a pleasure talking to you and going through this world we live in, and trying to give some knowledge back to the folks that are out there. I always say if they can take a smidge of what we talked about and it's useful to them, it was a successful podcast. But I think they're going to get more than that from this one.
Good.
I appreciate your time, and I thank you.
I appreciate the platform. Thank you for having me on. I had a great time. So, likewise.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Performance Talk. I've been here with Dan Pope. Go get the book, y'all. Go get the book. And we're out.